Hi, and hope you and your loved ones are well and safe wherever you are. I'm Dr. Amin Kaboli, lecturer at EPFL, business consultant and executive coach, and I have the honor and privilege to discuss about how high-performing leaders create psychological safety and trust with my dear friend, mentor, and professor, George Kohlrieser, distinguished professor of leadership and organizational behavior at IMD Business School. Thank you, George, for your time.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to be with you. And I also send a warm welcome to all our participants. And I hope they have some good questions and comments as we go through the session today.
Excellent. Thank you. George, to start with, how has COVID-19 changed the nature of what you do and how you do it?
Well, the biggest change is that we now are living in a world of danger, a lack of safety, a sense of uncertainty of what's going to happen, so that we have become, in general, more suspicious. And so that is affecting the mindset of people. And then it changes the whole idea of social interaction, the idea of that we can be close, we can hug people, we can shake hands. So we have to engage in a kind of social distancing. For example, if you are engaged in a sports activity, you generally give a big high five. Young kids now do not experience what that means. Those of us who have grown up with the high five, we know what the loss is when that is not happening. That social group is experiencing a loss of a certain activity that inspires. So it also means that we can have the person-to-person impact in leadership development. We're dependent on Zoom. And while Zoom has many, or WebEx or Teams, has many advantages, it still is not social bonding in the same way that the person in physical presence can have. So it's more exhausting. You can't read the same signals that you would do with personal presence. So there's a lot of losses. Everything from being forced to wear masks or expected to wear masks, from the social distancing, the not being able to do normal activities. We are living in a changed world, and that for some people is a dramatic loss that they have had trouble adjusting to.
Thank you. We talked about the social distancing, how to keep the social bonds intact while you are in social distancing.
Yeah, that's a good question, because there are two levels of bonding. Well, there are many levels of bonding, but physical bonding and the ability to touch, the ability to feel the emotional presence of another person is very powerful. So the social bonding has become connected to a psychological process of bonding. So I feel connected even without the physical proximity. And bonding is a fundamental behavior of leadership. Leaders need to be able to bond and to be able to create that sense of safety, which we're going to talk about more later. Is harder to do when you cannot do it with physical proximity. I had one leader in a discussion complaining that he could not get his team meetings to be inspiring. So what I suggested is you have an individual discussion, which he had never done, with each of his team members, and he had 12 team members, about how the pandemic affected them. What were the losses? And it changed dramatically how that team worked and his bilateral relationships with his team members, because he never understood what the individual impact was on each person. So when he could connect individually over Zoom, he was able then to bring the whole team together and come back to the inspiring level. You see, the participants felt the bond of his interest. And you have to really, as a leader, extend yourself like never before to show interest. Extend yourself like never before to be curious about the people you are working with. And to remember that on those Zoom meetings, you are not the most important person. Who is the most important person are those team members.
Thank you. Very nice point. If you talk you addressed safety and psychological safety. Let me go there and then ask you this question. Who are the leaders or those that are secure-based leaders or those leaders who create psychological safety?
You mean who are some of them?
Exactly. Who are these type of leaders or secure-based leaders?
Well, you can look at somebody like Gandhi, Nelson Mandela at high political levels. If you also see organizations who have the leaders who show curiosity, people trust them. And I'm reluctant to say too many names about who the models might be, but we all know when we are working for someone who creates that sense of trust, and the person effect shows up in the ability to create a bond. So there are leaders all over, but unfortunately, we have far more leaders who don't create that psychological safety and do not build that kind of trust.
Thank you. So what are the characteristics of this type of leaders, like Gandhi, like Nelson Mandela? I believe we can put Jacinda Ardern there as a young leader.
You can put a lot, and we have women coming in very strongly. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, of Finland, just to name a couple. And part of it is the ability to create that person effect that when you are with them, you do not feel defensive. You see, the brain now is really oriented towards danger.
Yeah.
It's almost easy to be paranoid, over suspicious. Walking down the street and you pass somebody, you immediately in your mindset wonder, is this person capable of killing me, of passing the virus to me? So that's the natural function of the brain, to be negative, to defend. So the person effect is that positive or negative impact that you have on another to make them feel comfortable, to make them feel trust. We all have that experience. We meet someone, we say hello, and you feel a kind of trust emerge. And you have another person where you feel defensive. But then as you get to know them, that defensiveness leaves. And then you have those in which you just never can really connect at that deeper trusting level. All leaders have to be able to give that person effect, which is unique among each individual. It's the individual way that we connect to other people or to groups. And many, many leaders are not in control of their person effect, and they give off vibrations or signals that say, do not trust me. And when you combine that with people who had all kinds of experiences, having a loud voice, being intense, being to the introvert side as opposed to the extrovert side, these may trigger all kinds of reactions in the followers. So you as a leader have to be very emotionally sensitive to the impact that you're having on others. But psychological safety is built around how we create that positive person effect. And the interesting thing, I mean, and you know this, is that you can do this by delivering pain. Good leaders, it doesn't mean that you're just creating safety, because the goal is not safety. The goal is to dare people. The goal is to step beyond the bounds of what you are doing. And so you have to be able to fire someone, give tough feedback, say the truth, be transparent, and you do that from a caring state, and people will welcome that, and that's part of the secure base.
Thank you. We talked about, George, we talked about person effect. A couple of times you addressed this. I appreciate if you define it and then bring some examples for this for audience that probably they don't know, or probably some of them they know about the person effect.
Well, the person effect is the unique way each leader, each individual connects positively or negatively to other people. And it triggers emotional reactions, can either be positive or be negative. I had an experience yesterday of seeing a farmer here near Basel, I'm in Basel, who was baling hay. It was an old system where they used a baler and actually created these block bales. And there was a person who was on the wagon stacking those bales of hay. It was a woman, amazingly, and she would throw those bales around amazingly. And you could see her personal positive effect on the workers around her. She was not negative. She was not giving negative orders, but they really inspired her, and she could stack that wagon like I couldn't believe. But see, that person effect triggered in me all kinds of memories, having grown up on the farm, doing that myself, throwing bales of hay around and getting them into the barn and so forth. So that's just one example. Another is the leader who, in a team meeting, talks too much, and so they have a negative effect. Or a leader who asks curious questions, shows interest.
Mm-hmm.
In hostage negotiation, which I do for many, many years, is the fundamental part of a hostage negotiator in a hostage situation is to be able to create that person effect in which you convince the hostage taker by the way that you interact with that person, and you understand their pain through the dialogue, and you make concessions, and you get 95% of hostage takers to give up their hostages, give up their weapons, and come out knowing full well they're going to go to prison. That's the person effect. And you see, psychological hostage taking is where you feel powerless or you feel helpless by being triggered into something negative. So psychological hostage taking is another form of being powerless. And when you have that sense of safety, you will not feel powerless. You will not feel the negative impact, so that you're willing to take a risk. Like I said before, the goal is not safety. Many times people interpret psychological safety as the goal. No, psychological safety is the means to take risks. And one of the biggest reasons that leaders fail is they stop taking enough risks. When you play to win, you take risks. And to do that, you have to work with your brain to make sure you shut off the brain's over focus on danger.
So we are talking here about the mindset for sure, right?
Right.
Is it the growth mindset, or is it the mindset for playing to win or playing to not lose?
It's certainly the growth mindset. It's the mindset of playing to win. Playing not to lose is defensive.
Yeah.
If you're playing not to lose, you're going to be risk avoidant. Now, assessing risk becomes very important to do, and not taking stupid risks. But we all need to be willing to fail, take a chance, do things. And that brings us to the second major reason that leaders fail is they don't connect well. They don't bond. Their person effect says, stand back. I don't trust you. Keep distance. You see, leaders have to create bonds.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you don't like someone, you have to be able to bond to them. You have to turn an enemy into an ally. You have to be able to turn an adversary into an ally. That's the secret of really good leadership, is that you do not become a hostage. You do not let another person's person effect influence you to feel rejected or whatever, humiliated, etc. And you pull back and you break that bond. You keep the bond through all kinds of conflict to find a solution.
George, how in this context of keeping bond and connection and separating all the differences, despite the differences, keeping the bond, how we can build trust, or as a leader, how a leader could build and maintain trust?
Well,
is it just bond, or there are other elements?
Oh, there are lots of elements. It includes the words, the stupid words that some leaders sometimes use that alienate people, that discount them, make them feel belittled. So starting with the words, and then your physical presence, your posture, your attitude, your tone of voice, all of these play into this. And it's the nonverbals coming together with the verbals that create this positive person effect and enable you then to keep that bond. And when you are attacked, the big thing you have to do is not attack back. What do you do if you're attacked? You ask the question, I'm angry with you and I don't want to work with you anymore. The defensive response would be to say, well, that's your problem. No, the the correct way is to say, what did I do that upset you? You engage that person. You ask the question that take them into understanding their loss. This is one of the biggest problems. Leaders do not really engage to understand loss. And if we know behavioral economics, Armin, which I know you do, is that over 80% of decision making is based on avoidance of loss, avoidance of pain, and experiences in the past that are brought into the present. And so what was won the Nobel Economics Prize in 1992 discovered something that's very important in understanding motivation. Loss is the major factor in why people decide. And even the most rational person, and I love to work with rationalists, whether they're engineers, whether they're architects, lawyers, financial people, they do great work, but they often think the world is built around rationality. Wrong. Behavioral economics discovered that we are emotional beings who happen to think. And so whether you're negotiating, whether you're leading, whatever your role is as a team member, you have to be able to take into account emotions, because that determines how you create a state, and that depends what you focus on. And one of the things that's most interesting now in these days is how to work with pressure and stress. And I'm researching this very extensively with my team to understand how stress and high pressure are fundamental to really high performing leadership. And we're learning a lot about how leaders who face stress, like Jim Halvo, when he was in the Apollo 13, and they had this disaster when they were trying to get to the moon, or Sully Sullenberger, who had to land this plane after a bird strike. They lived with a whole leadership behavior that kept them focused into being successful. Many leaders cannot lead under stress or pressure, and we are now facing that more and more, because many organizations are facing the reality of drying up revenue streams, to having to lay off people, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. Thank you. During this corona outbreak, we observed how some leaders, such as leaders of South Korea, earlier we mentioned, Taiwan, New Zealand, and Germany, were exemplary, and they were like high-performing leaders. They were relatively successful in crisis management. I'm a little bit like staying conservative and saying relatively, because there might be some cluster outbreak and some cases back the same as Singapore, for example. And they gained the social trust of their nation. What do you think, George, they have done different from other leaders?
Number one, they spoke the truth. Mm-hmm. They were transparent. They were honest. They were believable, and they were caring. They cared not about themselves and the power of their position, but they cared about the people they were leading. And you can tell when someone is a narcissist and focused too much on themselves. The whole idea that leaders are there to make other people important. I serve you. Mm-hmm. And there's this dilemma. As you begin leading, you finish your college or your high school or whatever you're doing, your MBA, etc. You have to build your identity. And that identity often is built around the idea of what I can do, proving I can do something. But there comes a very definitive time, and usually it will be around a crisis, in which you recognize that this is no longer about building your identity. You have what it takes. It's about serving. It's about focusing on others. That's why we really see high-performing leaders are trying to help develop other leaders. They're trying to build their skills, their talents. And in that sense, they're a talent hunter to help bring out the best in others. Not that they are serving you as the leader, but you are serving them. So that's why one of the most important questions every leader, every team leader needs to ask: how can I help you to be more effective in your job? What is it you would like to learn? What talent would you like to develop? Because the moment, as my dear mentor, Warren Bennis always said, the moment you stop learning, the moment you stop being creative, and curious, that's the moment you stop leading.
Excellent. I want to follow up on the question that I had, George. 3 out of these successful leaders, if we put South Korea aside, 3 out of 4 cases that I talked about, they were female leaders. This brings me to the issue about like female and male leaders, and are female leaders better than male leaders? What is your view on that?
I don't think we can say they're better leaders, men or women. There are many characteristics that are similar between men and women, and there are also many characteristics that are different. Women potentially will make better leaders, potentially. Why? Because they connect better. They know more about bonding, and their life experience has been built around lack of competition and aggression, which becomes a weakness in a way, but they have the ability to create bond. What women have to learn is how to engage in conflict, how to be able to put that fish on the table, go through the bloody mess of the conflict to find a solution, how to be able to negotiate. And one of the greatest experiences a young girl can have in growing up is parents who encourage that idea of pushing back, the idea of engaging in conflict and not running away from it. And the second thing is to engage in team sports. When you're out there on that football field, basketball court, whatever, you don't run away from the pain. You get hit, you fall down, you get up. When a young woman develops that in their early mindset, they're likely then to be a much more effective leader. Women are much better in potentially when they have had that experience. Now, what is missing in many men is bonding. They don't bond. They don't connect. They don't even know what that word means to be caring in some extreme cases. But leaders have to be caring. That's the whole idea of care to dare. You care as a way to shut the brain down so that you can dare people to step out of the box, because life is not about safety. Life is about adventure, about seeing the beauty and the opportunities. So men who have never learned to bond, they may be 50 years old and still have to learn that. I've worked with leaders from all over the world who didn't understand bonding, and they had to learn that behavior. And what we know mostly for men is that it comes from the father. The father, the male figure, teaches men how to care so that they don't find caring effeminate. They're able to feel it as something masculine. So that's a very good point as we develop leaders, and especially young leaders. And we know leadership is not something you're born with. You learn it. You learn it. And it starts in childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, etc. And the good news, Armin, as you know, is that you can develop this at any point along the way. But you have to have a secure base to teach you that. You can't learn it yourself.
Absolutely. There are a lot of good nuggets there. One that if I want to wrap it up in one part is just like on a high level or high performing leaders in that league, there's no difference between the gender, significant difference between the gender. But then leaders like female leaders or female, they are potentially great leaders that you say, they need to go more for the daring, and for male, they need to go more for caring, bonding and caring. Is that correct?
That is partially correct. I think there's always going to be the person effect. Those are the listeners out there who have heard or who've had a female boss. It's always going to be different having a female boss and having a male boss. Now, both are excellent if they do the caring and the daring in combination. Test it out. If you're going to go to an airline counter and engage in a negotiation to get an upgrade or to get on a plane, who do you want to go to generally, a male or a female? It's much more likely that you want to go to a female because they're going to be more caring. Now, that doesn't say all women leaders are caring. You can find some alpha females as well. So you have to read the signals before you engage in a negotiation or a dialogue. But the person effect is always there. And we see that in police circles. We know we would be far better off in the world if there were many, many more police women who are enforcing the law, because they get a very different person effect. And the whole idea of using force does not come in the forefront of a woman's mind as quickly as males. And so when we see males who are over aggressive and no longer engage in the dialogue process to de-escalate, that is more natural to women, unless the men have learned that. And we've got a real systematic problem in how we are training and selecting police officers in the United States, as
Exactly.
many of you who have maybe observed.
Yeah. We received a very good question from Peter.
By the way, we invite all people to send in their questions or comments, right?
Yeah, exactly. We appreciate if you send on the chat your questions, either on YouTube Live or here in Zoom. Peter says, my question relates to the implementation of psychological safety in a workplace that has a long history of top-down organizational culture. So there are 3 or 4 questions, but I would go for the first one. How should one think about trying to introduce and embed psychological safety when there is a very different legacy and line leadership's mindset and behaviors are asked to suddenly change? Well, a little bit like...
Well, I think you have to start at your own level. When Google did their research on psychological safety, which is the benchmark for psychological safety, the Aristotle Project, they found 2 important things: creating conversational equalness so that people speak about the same amount of time, and secondly, they show respect. So you as a team leader have to be able to engage on that at your level on down, and you model it. Now, if you've got a boss where you can put the fish on the table and express that there's a problem, take the courage to take that risk and do that. Many people are not aware that they are not creating psychological safety. If at the top level, there's too much emphasis on results, too much emphasis on the product, or being able to engage in this dehumanizing behavior, that has to be put on the table as an issue for high performance. Because what the secret is when you create the safety, you create the bonds, you then get better results. Does fear work? It can work. But the problem with fear is that you have to keep adding higher and higher levels of threat. So those managers who have built a culture built around fear, or even worse, dishonesty or lack of transparency, they're doomed to fail, because they don't inspire the workers to develop their own interest and engagement. And we know Gallup has found in all their years of emotional engagement research that we still live in a world where lots of people are disengaged. And the reason is they don't have a boss who cares. At the end of their research every year, they just add this idea that they have proved over and over again. The best way is for an employee to be engaged is have a boss who shows caring. And they actually have developed 12 questions to help identify that. So whether you use the secure-based characteristics of leadership in the book Care to Dare, or whether you use the Gallup 12 questions, or you use just simple dialogue about how can I as a leader help you bring out the best in yourself, that will solve the part of the problem at least. But we have to change the cultures. And there are organizations who are building cultures around this whole idea of caring to dare, how we create a culture that brings out the best in people and that they live without fear.
I see. I'm dealing with some companies, and right now, very senior executive level, we see they're shifting toward from being cost-saving view or cost-efficient view, shifting to agility, shifting to resilience in supply chain or in their operations. So now this shift has a mindset shift as well. How do you see this one, like post-Corona era?
Well, the fact is there are many organizations who are not going to or who are going to fail, who are going to have to downsize, who engage in new streams of revenue, meaning that people have to be laid off or downsized. The thing is that leaders have to be able to deliver pain from an attitude or a state of being concerned or caring about the person that they're firing or downsizing. There are people every day who can let someone go, and the person who is dismissed will be angry, of course. They'll have a strong grief reaction, but they will respect the boss who dismisses them in an appropriate way, in a caring way. And what that means is that you discuss what this impact is going to be on them. You also show interest as an organization in their personal development. How can we help you in this transition? We're not just throwing you into the river. We're throwing you into a new adventure, a new possibility. How can we help do that? And of course, we're all living in the world in which coronavirus has to be a learning point. If you are not learning from it, then you're missing out on the crisis, because many people are using this to be defensive rather than say, what can I learn? What can I do differently? What can I understand about myself, about the world? The new normal will never return to the old normal. The new normal is going to be something that has variation on how we interacted. And some airlines, for example, or some industries are going to be more heavily affected. And that's going to be dramatic adjustments. But you see, the leaders have to stand up and have the courage. I get so upset when I see this lack of courage, running away from conflict, running away from courageous conversations, running away from reality. The truth is the truth, but deliver the truth in a respectful and caring way. We don't need more nice leaders. We need kind leaders, and we need leaders who are willing to be courageous. We have too many weak leaders who are afraid of conflict, afraid of courageous conversations. I'm sorry, what did you say?
No, exactly. They're afraid of conflict because the definition of conflict, or the perception about conflict is something negative.
Yeah.
The transaction could be positive there, not necessarily.
Conflict is basically positive. Of course, if you read the newspaper, you see all kinds of conflicts that are destructive. The thing is, conflict is based on difference. We like difference. We need difference, but it's how we deal with that. And one of the problems with conflict is that people easily feel rejected. They think everybody has to agree with them. There's a big difference between listening, paraphrasing, understanding someone, and agreeing with them. As a hostage negotiator, I listened to so much garbage. It was unbelievable, but I didn't necessarily agree with it, but I had to communicate that I understood it, that I could accept listening to that. And paraphrasing, even what I profoundly disagreed with, was essential to build that bond.
George, we had this discussion before, but I think it would be good to expand it here as well. Part of it, or as you mentioned, as a hostage negotiator, part of the talk is in a way that we inspire. How you distinguish this inspiration with manipulation? But I know what is the answer. Are we going to expand it for the audience?
No, I think manipulation gets a bad name. We all want to influence others, and I don't like the word manipulation. I don't like it any more than most of the other people listening. We all are wanting to influence. From the time we're a child, we're wanting to influence. The baby who's crying wants to influence the mother or the father to be held or whatever it is that they want. So to be a powerful leader, you have to be an expert at influencing. The question about manipulation, is it focused only on yourself? It's truly destructive manipulation if you're doing something that doesn't take into account the needs of the other person. So a good negotiator starts out with the attitude, I want to help you. I want to help you get what you need. What is it that you need? What is it that you want? I show as much interest in your needs as I do my own. And who's the most important person in any negotiation? It's the other person. So I'm trying to influence them. I'm trying to persuade them. And hostage negotiators are experts at this. They're able to convince 95%, as measured by Interpol and the FBI, 95% of hostage takers to give up their hostages coming out knowing full well that they're going to probably go to prison. You see, that's a powerful form of influence. I wouldn't call it manipulation. It is a form of manipulation, but it's the fundamental influencing that goes on in all kinds of social bonding.
Thank you, George. We have a lot of questions from the audience here. What does daring really mean? Mishari, I believe he or she asked, what does daring really mean? How am I expected to encourage my team to take risk?
So daring means that you step out of the box. You go into the world where things are uncertain, unsafe. You take risks. So it's an adventure. It can be a big adventure. You leave a secure job and you go into a startup of some kind. Or you decide you want to live in a different way. So you buy a ranch or a house out in the Timbuktu and you try something very new. That is all daring. It's living life as an adventure. We don't have enough people at work environments living their work as an adventure.
Exactly.
And in every adventure, as Joseph Campbell so well demonstrated in his whole thing about the hero's journey and the heroine's journey, is built around the calling, a calling to adventure. What is the desire in your heart? So that we don't expect team members necessarily to develop the strategy at the highest level of the vision of the company, but we expect them to work in their best ways possible. Best practices. How can we do things different? How can we take a chance? How can we have courageous conversations? And the ideas that are there all come out of this daring. But see, the brain has to get out of its fundamental drive to be protective, to be overdriven to survival, so that we have survival, we have the part of the brain that is the limbic emotional system that is most sensitive to loss, anger, sadness, fear, and rejection. And we have the executive states that are involved in making a choice. There is no experience that you cannot override by the executive state in the choice that you want to make. Even somebody like Edith Edgar, who came to IMD, she was a teenager in Auschwitz, 92 years old. She wrote a book called Choice. She took 25 years to get over the trauma. And she says, the greatest gift of my life I learned in Auschwitz. And her mentor, Viktor Frankl, who wrote the whole thing on finding meaning and purpose. Yeah,
but we talk about, it's very beautiful. Let me continue on this line now. And then I'm going to go pick a couple of questions here. You talked about the hero's journey and you talk about calling. How people, they find their calling in your point of view?
Very simple. Listening to your own heart, your own soul. It's a desire. I desire something. And those of you out there who have children, you know when they have a desire to play music or to play sports or to do whatever, or someone wants to they have a desire to be a doctor, or they have a desire to do such and such. Desire is the most important part of a calling. Then you have that which comes from inside, and then you have obvious things outside, the signals that come from, okay, suddenly there are opportunities that are dropped in your path. And after a certain point, you pick up the signals, this is something I ought to be doing or that I want to do. But then it becomes something that you want or you desire. So we're looking for signals, internal signals, external signals. Daring means that I'm willing to listen to those signals outside, and I'm willing to listen to signals inside. And then I step up to that, and I'm willing to take the risk to achieve that, even though it may involve failure.
Yeah, exactly. It gives a feeling of pull that like you feel like invisible pool is out there. Is that correct?
Yes.
I don't know. It's just a feeling that I say, like it's like invisible pool that is out there, and definitely desire has its own setbacks and failures and suffering. But this doesn't mean it's one shot. It's multi-shot, and they're persistent in this, as you share in your classes, which is bonding process of like attachment, detachment, and suffering, and then getting back again on the loop.
Well, it's not just pulling, it can also be pushing, and especially from the outside. If the signals are so clear, it pushes you into something. It can be a pull or it can be a push, but the universe is so wonderful. It's so beautiful. It just brings opportunity. You know, Jim Collins, in a kind of discussion I had many times with him, he researched luck, and he basically believes there is no such thing as luck. It's creating opportunities. It's creating signals, listening to those signals. People who are lucky are just fundamentally curious and willing to take risks.
We have a question from Juan. In team dialogue or meetings, what behaviors, rituals can help with psychological safety?
Oh, boy, that's very good. Taking a moment in every meeting at the beginning or the end to clarify the goal of what we're here and to clarify the process. The idea that people speak about the same amount of time. This is a very fundamental finding that Google came out of their Aristotle project. People who talk too much. And we all know leaders who talk too damn much. They're constantly just talking. Leaders have to listen. And we teach the 4-sentence rule, which the research shows how long the brain can actually maintain maximum attention in a dialogue. 4 sentences. So teams have to be able to have that kind of ritual of how are we doing, to be able to say, okay, what can we improve in how we're functioning? And the second thing is to show respect. If you've got somebody who's bullying, someone who's dominating, someone who is too introverted, you have to help that introvert come out. They need a little bit more space, and somebody has to be able to invite them to come out. And as we all know, good leaders, ultimately, you can't tell if they're introverts or extroverts because they compensate. They're able to do the role that's needed. But some people never overcome that, and so they're limited ultimately in the role. So team building rituals, found functions of talking about how they're working together, inclusion, and being able to do things that make working together fun. One of the great characteristics of high-performing teams is they have fun. I don't care if you're a Navy SEAL team or a German SEAL team or whatever the country is, military unit, they have certain moments of fun. And if you're a high-performing team, even in a surgery in a hospital, if you're doing open heart surgery or you're doing another kind of COVID caring, there has to come a moment where you experience the pleasure of that and the meaning in that. As a team, do we know what our vision is? Do we know where we're going, what our goals are, and our mission?
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
George, if you permit me, we go through the other part. We are in a very difficult time, changing, and we're gonna have Q3 reports for things that don't look as rosy as 2015 or 2013 and so on, that the stock market was going up or jobs were provided and so on. So we will have a lot of layoffs. We will have a lot of, let's say, impermanence, more frequency in life. And there will be more people seeking their own, let's say, calling and seeking their own voice. What is your advice for them? Well,
take into account what is possible just as a starting point, and then think of what your dreams are. Mm-hmm. Martin Luther King, I have a dream. And find a secure base. Find people around that you can trust to help you. Leadership is a talent. Taking risks is a kind of talent. As Anders Ericsson always pointed out, you have to be able to practice, You have to be able to practice correctly, and you need a mentor, you need a coach, you need someone who can help teach you. One of our big problems is we don't have enough positive, secure bases who actually care in helping you develop. So just because it seems like an impossible dream, you don't want to give it up so easy. You want to stick to it, and you want to engage in what you believe in. There are so many examples of people who believed in themselves because someone believed in them. And I think that's a key learning in life. How do we have people around us who really believe in us? And for many of us, they may have grown up in a family in which the parents didn't really stand behind them. They were either too negative, too detached, whatever it might be. So they don't know what it is to have someone standing behind them, supporting them. And when you look at successful people, they will always talk about who was the person standing behind them. Martin Luther King, he studied Gandhi. He knew Gandhi better than Gandhi himself. Never met the man, but he understood nonviolent protests. And same with Nelson Mandela. And we can just go through all the great transformers. And that means change. And we have to get away from this negative idea that people don't like change. People don't like the pain of change, the fear of change, but really people need change. We need to be changing, curious, to build neurons in the brain. When you watch old people who are full of vibrancy and they're full of life, they're living life as an adventure. They're bonding to all kinds of things. And they're not in that victim defensive position. So that we need more and more people who are willing to stand up and seek adventures, seek dreams, and live dreams. And when you reach a dream, go through the process of grief. And we didn't talk much about grief today, but grief is the most important part of what blocks most people. They are either filled with anger, regret, shame, lack of confidence, you name the whole list. But you ultimately have to get over that and come back to seeing the beauty of life and having something to fight for.
Absolutely. We have a good question linked to grief. Let me just bring it here. Somebody asked, he or she would like to know more about loss on decision making. I want to go deeper there, and specifically about grief.
Okay, so the way the cycle of bonding works, we have to attach. And throughout our life, we have all kinds of attachments to people, to places, to objects, to goals, to things. And then we form a bond to them, ideally. And with that bonding, you take emotional energy. You give and take the energy. But every bond, no matter what, will come to an end. All things do come to an end. That is what people hate, that separation or that ending, the loss. And that triggers the grief reaction. And that is a necessary step to go back and rebond and reconnect. So that what we see in decision making is when you decide one thing, you decide against giving other. You give up other options. So losses come massively in organizations by failed projects, disappointments, inconsiderate behavior. You name the different possibilities, so that we become immune or we become too detached to pain, and we just avoid any bonding to not feel that pain. High performers are willing to engage in pain. They're willing to face failure. They're not hostages to their fear of loss. And so what we see is the need to be able to understand the loss that constantly is coming around us and not deny it. Organizations are filled with denial of grief, which affects the engagement. Vibrant, high-performing teams are able to find rituals of grief, being able to talk about the grief of loss of a project, etc. And for some people, working at home has been a big loss because they don't have that social contact with their team. And for other people, it's been a great experience. They like it. They don't have to go to the office. For others, it means that they have lost a certain amount of freedom to get away from their family. I mean, losses come in many forms. So that decision-making, as what behavioral economics points out is that most people decide to avoid pain. They decide to avoid the loss. But that you have to rewire the brain and be able to seek pain, which will always happen with risk taking. But the reward will be greater than whatever the disappointment was. Joseph Campbell recognized this as a hero's journey, the call to adventure. The bigger the call, the bigger potential loss. And the second stage was to go through the valley of tears, the painful part of what happens with any calling. And then comes the transformation, the learning. What we miss is too many people not taking the opportunity to learn from a crisis, learn from a difficult situation, learn from a failure, learn from whatever happens.
Exactly. One thing is getting and understanding that the nature of this life is changing and nothing stays permanent. And we are going through the experience in this world as an impermanent event of life. That would probably makes us to better lead and to get to bond deeper and accept the loss and go through the grief faster, probably.
Exactly. And by the way, this connects to generations. So the millennials and whatever the generation beyond the millennials are called, they have a different mindset about life. They see differently than people in their 50s or retired people. And the world is changing in mindset as we go through generational changes.
Absolutely. As Jung says, like there is a morning of life and afternoon of life. Normally, this could match like 30s or 40s. Like the morning of life, we learn something, and that doesn't hold in the afternoon of life. And then we seek meaning in something totally different, probably. So, George, we are running out of time. We have just 7 minutes, and I know you have a busy schedule. So let's go for the last question. How do you see leadership in future?
Well, I think leaders have to be able to come back to the humanization of organizations. We have done too much dehumanizing, focusing on goals. And how we work is changing dramatically. The way we work today is going to be very different in the future. To stay alert to artificial intelligence, to stay alert to all the opportunities of robots and technology. But it's changing. And just take the iPhone. How can I put words to it? I'm just shocked when you see the amount of time people spent on an iPhone.
And how many times they're checking their screen, you know?
Yeah. And again, this wasn't there 5 years ago, or certainly not 10 years ago. So technology can either be a friend or we can be a hostage to it. When you see young kids at a dinner table on their screens, on their iPhones or their iPads, whatever they're using, they miss the social interaction. So to come back to the question, work in the future is not clear how it's going to be. There's all kinds of forecasts about what's going to happen. But what we have to do is take into account the agility and the flexibility of leaders. And that in the end, we still are always going to need people. As much as they have tried to create emotions in robots and through artificial intelligence, they haven't fully succeeded, although they're working on it very hard. But we have to see opportunities rather than the losses. And that's another big thing, is there's losses everywhere. The world is changing, and that we have to look for the opportunities. And I think it means much more social consciousness as well. The lack of fairness in distribution of life, everything from water to finances, etc. The lack of tribal, or the over tribalization, excluding people, including people. We are one person, or we are one. How do I want to say this? We have the genetic structure of being one, unity, and there's such a division happening now over fighting of resources and the overfighting of power. Let's get rid of this drive to overpower and dominate, to come back to cooperation. I think if we're going to survive in leadership roles, it's being able to cooperate within an organization, between organizations. And many people have not grown up with that ability to learn to cooperate, to give and take, to make concessions at the right moment.
It's a beautiful lesson, George. I mean, as always, you always leave us with inspiration, which is the lesson of compassion and being compassionate and having empathy for each other.
Yeah.
And,
Can I add one more point?
Sure.
And that is that we have to come back to the idea that everybody's a leader. There are no such things as certain people are leaders. They may have a role of leaders, but everybody has to be learning from early childhood on that they have to take responsibility to be able to get what they want and to collaborate in doing that. So that self-leadership is always going to be there. Some people are in more roles of leading others or leading organizations. I just want to get that point in.
Thank you. So everybody's leader. That's the take.
Well, can be a leader. Not everybody is.
Yeah,
There's too many victims.
Potentially.
Potential.
Yeah, exactly. Needs to be developed. Thank you very much, George, again, for your time. I really appreciate the time that you provided for us and you gave me to interview you and have discussion with you.
Thank you. And thank you for the wonderful questions and the facilitation of a great dialogue. So I appreciate that. I'm always happy to help people stop and think about ideas they may already know, but especially when they find new ideas.
Excellent. Thank you, George. Thank you very much for joining this discussion. Any thoughts you would like to share at as a last point or last take for us?
Okay, I think it would be the point to always stay inspired. No matter what happens to you, come back to finding a way to inspire yourself and then inspire others. It's one of the great gifts in life is to be able to help people feel uplifted. And with this pandemic, there's far too much complaining, far too much negativity. Reality is reality. Where can we find inspiration? And being able to be kind, not necessarily nice, but be kind, but also have good, tough, courageous conversations to influence other people and to enjoy leading. I love leadership. I love when I see leaders love leading and being able to really enjoy that process. We also have too many leaders who find it too stressful. Leading is a wonderful activity.
Thank you, George.
You're very welcome.